Good afternoon, everyone. So this is kind of a big story, and it's one I've tried to make a video about a couple of times today and failed. And each time I've gone back to do more research to flesh out questions that the video that I was doing didn't answer, and just kind of left me like, oh, I got to answer this before I move on. So, okay, we're going to look at what Leadnow is. We're going to look at who Ben Branzel is. We're going to look at the foreign influence of Leadnow and Ben Branzel's organizations in Canadian elections, and we're going to look at an Ontario-based one that's going to go national, and there's a news story about that I'll finish with. But the main part of this story is how much international money, non-Canadian money, is being funneled through organizations that are being made to look organic and homegrown when they're not. So, what is Leadnow? Leadnow is a Vancouver-based nonprofit society that was created in 2010 with the goal of bringing to Canada a model of online political campaigning and movement organizing that began in the U.S. behind President Barack Obama. During Canada's 2015 federal election, Leadnow ran a strategic voting initiative called Vote Together. Leadnow claims to have defeated 25 conservative incumbents. That's a stretch, but in a small number of ridings, it's conceivable that Leadnow had an impact. For example, in Elmswood, Trescona, where Leadnow had paid staff and 130 volunteers, the conservative incumbent was defeated by only 61 votes. Leadnow's original business plan, and it's linked, and link is in the description along with all the other tabs that I note here, and there's even further supporting tabs on this one, so have a look into the supporting tabs if you're interested. Okay, so Leadnow's original business plan was written in 2010, called for $16 million over 10 years. Leadnow acknowledges that they received seed capital but will not identify the source. At least 17 companies and consultants have provided services to Leadnow, including the design of its brand, the creation of its donor base, surveys, polls, and report editing. One of Leadnow's original founding advisors is Ben Branzel. So here's the name to pay attention to for the minute. At the time, Branzel was the director of strategic incubation at the Citizen Engagement Laboratory, CEL, based in Oakland, California. With funding from the Tides Foundation, Tides, and that's a GMO, that's an NGO, non-governmental organization, NGO, Tides, and Tides itself is funded by George Soros. The CEL, began in 2008. The same year, the Tides began to fund its anti-pipeline tar sands campaign. In 2011, Branzel came to Canada to help set up Leadnow and has since provided behind-the-scenes help. On the basis of these facts, it appears that Leadnow was set up as part of CEL's strategic incubation program. One of CEL's fiscally sponsored program is the Online Progressive Engagement Network. And that's Open, and we'll look at that. Ben Branzel is its director. Open describes itself as a, quote, sisterhood of grassroots campaigning organizations from around the world. As it appears, the CEL bundles its, quote, strategic incubation projects, including Leadnow, into Open. Open's member groups appear to be authentically grassroots outfits, but in fact, some of them, including Leadnow, began with help from the CEL. Okay, so we're going to peel that back a little bit. Here's Ben Branzel, and we're going to look at what he says, but his work. This is lifted from Google Plus, and again, this link is from here. I don't have any other corroborating links, but it looks, all of this matches. All of this makes sense together when you look at the whole corpus of it. So, okay, Ben Branzel lives in Washington, D.C., Berkeley, California, works at the Citizen Engagement Lab, director of strategic incubator, Leadnow.Ca founding advisor 2011, and then other notes, right? And here is a life event for him from Facebook or some other, looks like LinkedIn actually. And he started his new job at Citizen Engagement, director of strategic incubation, January 1st, 2011. So that lines up. Here is the Open team. So this is Open, and we talked about Open just briefly, but it's the Online Progressive Engagement Network. And if you go down here, we'll read about Ben a bit more. So Ben has become a significant global catalyst of progressive digital organizing. After leaving MoveOn, he helped found or advise what would become open groups in Australia, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Ireland, India, and South Africa. He came home to serve as director of new media campaigns and fundraising for President Barack Obama during the 2009-10 health reform campaign. Okay, so that gives you some idea that Ben is a globetrotter. He's been to Australia, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Ireland, India, and South Africa. And actually, I'll just show you. Here's we're back. We're still on the Open website. Okay, links in the description. And here's their list of a conquest, I suppose. You've got the 38 degrees people power change in the United Kingdom. You've got Germany, and I had the link to that. I had some, I think I still do actually. The Get Up in Australia, MoveOn.org in the United States, Lead Now in Canada, Skiftjet in Sweden, Skiftjet, I don't know, Action Station in New Zealand, and Uplift in Ireland. So is this foreign interference in our election? Or is this just foreign money that's allowed to be wallpapered over and pretended that it's Canadian? I'm not sure. So here's Ben, and he's explaining interior power versus exterior power. This is from 2014, and he's doing a little talk on how to organize for the group called Fairse. Again, link is in the description. We're just going to listen to about a minute of it, but it describes how to deal with legislators who don't want to listen to the public and how to mobilize your base. But I found it interesting just to give you a kind of picture of who we're dealing with.
And an outside power strategy. A lot of groups have an inside power strategy, which means they think their route to change is keeping doors open to decision makers through good relationships, providing them good information about a problem, and then getting those decision makers to act on the basis of that sound information. That's fine. It works sometimes. It works if you have friendly decision makers. The problem is the outside power strategy is a very different theory. It's based on having enough people that even if the door closes, you can knock it down in a democracy because you have enough support. Where these things come in conflict is that in order to sustain a large enough grassroots force to execute the outside power strategy, you often have to say things that the insiders don't like. Like, for example, how do they actually vote on that budget resolution that you were campaigning on, or that human rights resolution, or what was in a speech that you did or didn't like. Now that might close the door on the insiders, the lobbyists, the access people, because the decision makers have been offended that you emailed your list and held them accountable. So the inside power strategy will try to, people in the organization will try to stop your outside power strategy people from having that kind of honest dialogue with your base, because they're worried about the door closing. So how do we deal with this?
So you can watch the rest of the link in the description, but my point for showing this is he's basically describing how to mobilize people against rule of law, right? And I'm not saying necessarily just rule of law, but he's saying the people who make the laws, the people who make the rules have an inside strategy and they want to keep their power, blah, 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 blah. It is a very new agey kind of description and approach to things. And no wonder. I mean, like he was one of the people who mobilized people for Obama, right? Like he is on the cutting edge of using this theory in real time. So I'm not saying that he's wrong, but I'm saying that his use of exploiting people the way he's exploiting people, getting people to believe so vehemently in an idea, regardless of evidence, in the face of evidence, that they will, attack people, etc. Had the seeds in what he's talking about now. He's right. I don't know if you can see the correlation I'm trying to draw. I'm not blaming him. I'm saying that that seed was planted with this style of mobilization, and now we're seeing the fruits of that labor across all sorts of different mediums. And it's wild. Like people are, it's propagating the stuff they believe in and shutting off everything else. They're turning off channels that disprove their belief. So this is interesting, and his whole goal was to use that to knock down the door of the elites who were making the power plays, right? And this is this speech was after George W. Bush and Barack Obama. This is 2014. So this is in the middle of the, end of the Obama presidency, but he's not a lame duck yet. There's still a couple of years, right? So, although in 2014, I suppose he was a lame duck, there wasn't a whole lot he could do. But his context is this plan is working and it looked likely to work or to continue to work, except that they ran into a Trump. So I find that interesting. So this guy is the guy who worked for Obama, who works at a California think tank, who helped Leadnow and a whole bunch of other quote unquote grassroots organizations rise up in a whole bunch of different countries that are now experiencing giant migrant crises. That seems really strange and an interesting coincidence, if you believe in coincidences still. Not sure I do. So here is who is behind Leadnow. It's a bit more of a fleshed out report. And I'm just going to read you part of the conclusion right now. And please read the rest of it. It is very, very interesting. And so this is updated. Last I saw, updated in 2017, referencing the BC elections. And that's some interesting reading if you've got a horse in that race. But I'll read you what we're talking about and keep it to Leadnow. So, quote, this is the conclusion of the paper. In less than 5 years, Leadnow has grown into an influential yet relatively unknown player in Canadian politics. Leadnow's get out the vote efforts are one of many factors in Canada's 2015 federal election and may have contributed somewhat to the Liberals' win of a majority government. And then there's some advice for people seeking to build a movement, says you should follow their structure. Leadnow says that it was founded in 2010 by a, quote, group of young people and portrays itself as thoroughly Canadian. Quote, we rely entirely on individual donations from Canadians, Leadnow said. But in 2012, Leadnow discontinued that policy against international funding. Quote, we've launched on a shoestring budget, Leadnow said, but as this report has shown, that is not the whole story. Leadnow has seed capital from an undisclosed source and a 10-year, $16 million plan to defeat the Conservative Party of Canada and permanently change how Canadians elect their government. That was the initial plan that I said was linked, and all the links are in the description. That I would just, if I started talking about that, it would take me off in another direction entirely. Just suffice it to say that they have a plan and they're following it and executing it. Okay, back to this. Since it began, Leadnow has been advised by Ben Branzel, the Director of Strategic Incubation at the Citizen Engagement Laboratory, CEL, based in Oakland, California. Leadnow is part of the online progressive engagement network, Open, and we looked at that, a fiscally sponsored program of the CEL. As it appears, Leadnow began as their project of strategic incubation program of this U.S. organization. So I'll just show you here. Here's the Citizen Engagement Laboratory and kind of what they do. The CEL lists the following groups as its engagement consultant partners. There's the Open Society. So engagement consultant partners help decide where the money goes. Okay, so here's the Open Society Foundations, and that's not the same Open Society Foundations you think I'm talking about. This is the Soros connection. So George Soros runs the Open Society Foundations. He, through the CEL, funds the Open Summit, and the Open Summit is this organization here. Okay. That's what this is. And here is the Open Society Foundations. Sorry, I wanted to show you this. Anybody who knows number 17 is important and the letter Q is important will see this and go, really? Yeah, I mean, really obvious, right? It's kind of crazy. So through his Open Society Foundations, George Soros funds Open Summit, and through Open Summit, all of these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, are created and look grassroots, right? There are a couple of kids who are, those plucky kids who are just up to no good, just trying to get into politics, right? So here's an a blog about the Open Summit at Gape Center, Holmes, New York. Quote, I've been on a whirlwind, and it began with my facilitation of Open Summit, the first ever leadership gathering of the world's leading online progressive engagement networks. Think MoveOn.org as replicated in the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, Germany, and Papua New Guinea. The great and unbelievably sweet Ben Branzel has been dreaming this up for years. This is in 2013, just in case you're not sure. In terms of network theory, Ben has been the hub connecting the global spokes. He traveled from country to country, befriending like-minded souls and sharing all he learned behind networks like MoveOn and the Citizens Engagement Lab. So she goes on to wax poetic about how great Ben is. Here's just a quote that I thought was funny. Quote, the group was whiter and more male than any of the groups I work with. That's a problem, and they know it. I trust they'll do something about it. We also had all kinds of guests coming through the summit and bring their brilliance. One of them was the legendary and awfully young Aaron Swartz, who passed away a day later, and I still can't wrap my head around that. So anybody who knows the history of who Aaron Swartz is, he was one of the creators of Reddit. He wrote the code. Most of the code is attributed to Swartz, and he was the one who wanted it to be a free speech platform. He wanted it to be what it was. The original Reddit, he helped with the subreddits, and then he was bounced. But it was back in 2008 that Swartz was writing Reddit. 2007, 2008. So, and yeah, he did a whole lot. If you don't know about Aaron Swartz, look into Aaron Swartz, but just think about that. Okay. So that's, George Soros, MoveOn.org, Ben Branzel, who is all American or international money funding through seemingly legitimate organizations, right? Here's the list of the group engagement consultants, and then through them, there's Open Summit, and through Open Summit, all of this. And I know I've gone through that a few times, but well, we're going to go to the next part. And like I said at the beginning, this is full of lots of twists and turns. So sorry if it's seeming to get convoluted. So we're going into how does this apply? So this is a May 31st article from the CBC. It says, quote, they want your vote, but they're not political parties. And we're going to go scroll down here. It says, but Ontario Proud isn't the only group hitting the phones in an effort to influence the vote. Leadnow.Ca is helping to organize its own Get Out the Vote effort, taking Liberal or NDP voters, targeting Liberal or NDP voters. Quote, this election is super volatile, said Leadnow's Brittany Smith. Quote, a handful of votes could make the difference between a PC candidate winning or losing. She says the organization is providing volunteers with a software package that allows them to set up phone banks in their community. Quote, they can use this super simple tech that lets them call into battleground ridings and talk to our key voters and make sure that the voters we want to show up and vote on election day actually have a plan to show up and vote. Smith says there are 67 phone banks in place across the province and figures Leadnow volunteers have reached about 30,000 voters so far. She says unlike political parties, they can't work off membership lists and are instead sourcing their numbers from telephone directories. That means they're more likely to reach voters with traditional landlines instead of mobile phones. And talks about they're trying to target mobile phones, et cetera, et cetera. But the whole point of Open is to arm their agencies, their surrogates, I suppose, in the countries with exactly that software. You know, that software that she's referencing is, and I don't know if it's given by Open or anything to that effect, but this is their goal. They want to consolidate and have a database for these groups to draw from, and then those groups then use those strategies and whatever worked from all of these other groups to influence their elections in their country. So my question is that okay? Is that above board? Is that just fine? Or is that something that's problematic and we should be looking at it as something that's problematic? That's my interpretation, and I think that we should be looking at it as something that's problematic. Here is a Calgary Herald article talking about, quote, new report alleges outside influence in Canada's 2015 federal election. It says, quote, foreign money funneled towards Canadian political advocacy groups affected the outcome of the 2015 federal election, according to a document filed last week with Elections Canada and obtained exclusively by the Herald. The 36-page report entitled Elections Canada Complaint Regarding Foreign Influence in the 2015 Canadian election alleges third parties worked with each other, which may have bypassed election spending limits, all of which appears to be in contravention of the Canadian Elections Act. The Canadian Elections Act states that, quote, a third party shall not circumvent or attempt to circumvent a limit set out in any manner, including by splitting itself into two or more third parties for the purpose of circumventing the limit of acting in collusion with another third party so that their combined election advertising expense exceeds the limit. So essentially these guys asked for a report to be done, and here's the report. Link is in the description, as I said before. And I mean, it's really kind of not, it's exactly what you would expect to see, I think. So it says the foreign interference. In recent years, concern has grown among democratic countries about election interference by foreign entities, in particular when this is done through the use of the internet and other computer-based systems. While much of the recent commentary on this issue pertains to elections outside of Canada, there is growing concern that Canada's own electoral process is vulnerable to foreign interference. The committee feels that provisions in the CEA that address foreign interference need to be strengthened to ensure Canada does not see similar issues in the next federal election. The CEA currently limits who is able to participate in certain aspects of the electoral process, thereby restricting foreign involvement. A broad and general restriction is found in Section 331, which sets out who is permitted to include electors to vote in a particular way. To induce electors to vote in a particular way. It states, no person who does not reside in Canada shall, during an election period, in any way induce electors to vote or refrain from voting, or vote or refrain from voting for a particular candidate unless the person is A, Canadian citizen, or B, permanent resident within the meaning of subsection 2(1) of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. So the section's breadth has caused difficulties for Election Canada and the Commissioner in recent elections. Elections Canada receives frequent complaints that the media statements, such as tweets or interview comments made by non-Canadians, violates this provision. It also receives questions about whether goods and services supplied by a foreign provider violate the Act. The overly broad wording of this provision diminishes public trust in how well the rules can be enforced. So, I mean, there are serious concerns with this act, clearly, but having unending money come into through NGOs to fund specific left-leaning political action seems like not the intent of the act either. So in their response, I mean, they're recognizing that there are limitations, but Bill C-76, which is attempting to fix these limitations, doesn't quite go far enough. So the last bit of this story, and there's a bunch of supporting documents. It's really incredible, really, what's going on. But this was reported yesterday, quote, by the Toronto Star, quote, Ontario Proud was instrumental in taking down Ontario Liberals. Now they're aiming for Trudeau. And I'm going to skip down because they talk about Ontario Proud, and they talk about how use of the non-government organization to do this is, well, we'll get to it. Quote, Ontario Proud drove the narrative of the campaign, Bollinger boasted in the update. We delivered on our goals, a defeat of the Kathleen Wynne-led Liberals, and a sunlight campaign that exposed the NDP's extreme candidates and agenda, ultimately helping to deliver a majority government for the Progressive Conservatives, all as a registered third party. Legal parlance for a political advocacy group, and that bills itself as nonpartisan, not-for-profit grassroots organization. And it's now gearing up to do the same for Andrew Scheer's Conservatives in the next fall election. Just like we did with Kathleen Wynne, Ontario Proud is building a war chest to take down Justin Trudeau. The group announced in a recent fundraising email. The Liberal Party is bracing for the onslaught, warning in its own fundraising plea last week that Ontario Proud, quote, founded and directed by alumni of Stephen Harper's government, will use tactics known for, quote, lowering the bar for political disclosure. Ballingall says Ontario Proud's precise plans for the Trudeau takedown will depend on the rules for third parties, which are in the flux at the moment. Currently, under Canada's Election Act, third parties that spend more than $500 during a federal election must register with Elections Canada. They can spend just over $200,000 on advertising during a campaign, but as much as they want before its official start, whereas political parties are banned from accepting donations from corporations or unions and face a strict $1,575 cap on individual donations. Third parties face no restrictions on donations or the size of their contributions. The Act expressly forbids colluding with political parties to circumvent the spending limits imposed on parties in a bid to level the monetary playing field. So that's the reason I wanted to show you this, basically because it's telling you that these NGOs don't have any rules for who can donate, don't have any rules for how much each individual donation can be, whereas political parties are stymied by that. So, I mean, even if somebody targeted wanted to wedge between the Liberal and the NDP, you could dwarf the NDP's spending and they wouldn't have any recourse at all. And they wouldn't have any way to fight it, it seems. There isn't a whole lot we can do. Back to the article. Quote, concerns were also raised about Canadian environmental advocacy groups using foreign money, primarily from the U.S., to influence the outcome of the election. In response, the Trudeau government has taken steps to rein in third parties, and Bill C-76, omnibus legislation that the government intends to have in place in time for next fall's election. It would increase the spending limits for third parties, but broaden the scope of expenses to cover all their political activities, not just advertising, and apply the limits to the months immediately prior to the election call. It would also spell out that collusion includes sharing of any information between a third party and a political party. But there have been few instances in which third parties have been caught colluding in the past, and C-76 is unlikely to change that in the future. It's very difficult to prove, Mark Maryland, Canada's former chief electoral officer, said in an interview. Mere circumstances or coincidences are not sufficient. You have to establish that there was a tacit agreement between the two parties to achieve a common goal. In one of the rare instances where proof was established, I love that they say it's really, really rare to come up with proof. It never happens. And then like right away in the article, they said in one of the instances where there was proof, Fair voted Canada, a group that promotes proportional proportional representation and an NDP campaign manager were found to have colluded in the 2017 by-election in Ottawa-Vanier. According to the compliance agreement struck with the Commissioner of Elections last May, the two admitted to working together to produce a brochure that denounced Trudeau for reneging on his promise of electoral reform. So I think that's pretty funny that they just right away, like, they toss that out the window because it just happened. They just, like, proved the case, and it happens. So okay, for their part, both Ontario Proud and the Conservative Party deny they're working in concert. So okay, we don't take orders from anyone, Ballingall said in an interview. He insisted Ontario Proud, which has a sister organizations in British Columbia and Alberta, is pro-conservative only to the extent that it is the lesser of evils. Quote, obviously, we have our own proclivity for smaller government, responsible government for stronger national defense, he said. So obviously this aligns more with conservatives, but it's not like we're rah-rah pro-conservative. We're just mostly saying we need to stop Justin Trudeau because he's bad for Canada. Although former Conservative MP Maxime Bernier's upstart People's Party of Canada might also be viewed as a natural ally, Ballingall ruled out supporting that option, calling Bernier, quote, more or less a joke. I reached out to him to find out if he meant this or if CBC cut this up, so I'll tell you if he gets back to me. Back to the article. Marion believes the elections commissioner might be, quote, much better equipped to detect incidents of collusion in future thanks to new powers conferred in C-76 to compel testimony and demand the production of documents. Still, given the way third parties have been evolving, he thinks limit may eventually have to be imposed on who can donate and how much they can give to third parties, as is done for political parties. Otherwise, Marion said, it's a run around the Elections Act. And I personally, I think that's already happening. I think we're already past that. I think that there are organizations that are running around the Elections Act and using money that shouldn't be used in elections in Canada to influence elections. I think that cat's out of the bag, or that genie's out of the bottle, or whichever euphemism or whatever you want to use. And I think the Bill C-76 doesn't go far enough. And my goodness, getting into Bill C-76 right now would just be insanity. So I'm not going to do that. But the bill itself doesn't address a lot of the issues that the report that was tabled in response to the 2015 election request for a report on this. It doesn't address a lot of the issues. And it kind of looks like it's addressing those issues, but it's not addressing those issues. So my main points here, number one, I don't think that international NGOs and American campaign managers should be running things for small Canadian NGOs who are attempting to influence elections nationwide, right? I don't think that they should be following a playbook laid out by Barack Obama's former campaign helper. And that goes for everybody. I think you should be able to put your advertisements up on Facebook, but I think if you live in a different country, I shouldn't be putting pro-Trump things up in the United States. I think that would be abhorrent. And the same way I think that it's abhorrent that somebody and certain groups think having one central location for all of these different countries to pull their leftist knowledge from is okay. I don't think it's okay. I think this contravenes our democratic process, because this adds power and punch to a message that, in my opinion, it's false power and punch, right? Like it doesn't resonate that well until you throw enough things at the wall and then you stick with those, right? It's the difference between using pollution instead of carbon. It's the hijacking the language of illegal immigrant to irregular border crosser, right? What do people not notice? And we've got all of these petri dishes to figure it out. And every single election they get better and better, and they share because it's one organization, it's one group, right? They share and they get better and they get better, and we're behind the eight ball, right? Because they've got a lot of money, and they've got international donors, and they've got people whose job it is to think of ways to mobilize people on the internet. And Elections Canada is middling around in the dark, saying, "Yeah, maybe there is international money around here, isn't there? Maybe there is." They have no idea what they're up against. They're losing, and in that situation, Canada loses, because the international groups who have the money, they get to push the message, and their message gets heard, and everybody else's message gets silenced. That's what I've learned over the last 6 months. You don't say what the news wants you to say, the prevailing wisdom wants you to say, then you get silenced. Welcome to the new internet. So This was a long interview, or not interview, long video. And I'm going to leave the interview part in because, thanks for watching. Check out peoplespartyofcanada.ca. Maxime Bernier is clearly against this stuff. He's talked about this stuff, and our laws are not nearly enough to cover it. Thanks for watching, and check out peoplespartyofcanada.ca.